Welcome to the Sonic Collective, a music podcast that explores a different album or musical concept each month, diving deep into its history, context, and impact on the music industry. Join our host, Alan, Scott, and Darren Scott, that's way too many Scotts, as they share their thoughts, insights, and personal connections to the music, inviting you, the listener, to discover new perspectives and appreciation for some of the greatest albums and music of all time.
Hello, music lovers, and welcome to the Sonic Collective's review of our pick for October 2023. This month, it was MC5's Kick Out the Jams. I've known about this album for, I would say, over a decade, and it just seemed that in the months leading up to this, every time I'd listen to a podcast or an interview with a band, they would cite MC5 as a major influence, and Kick Out the Jams as kind of that album that defined what was coming. This is really the absolute first punk album. So punk wasn't even a term, I don't think then, but it came out in February 1969, but the band formed 6 years earlier in 1963. And it took all those years for this debut album to come out. And it was actually recorded live, which is kind of weird for your first album, at Detroit's Grand Ballroom in 1968. I think it's one of those classics. It wasn't received very well upon its release. I think Lester Bangs, the famous music critic, called it ridiculous, overbearing, and pretentious. But as time went on, as I mentioned, a lot of bands have cited it as a major influence. So yeah, let's get right into it. I'm going to throw it to another Scott. Scott Gregory, what did you think?
Originally going in, I thought it was pronounced MC5, and I was really excited that we were going to review a Scottish band. Imagine my surprise when it turned out not to be so. But it challenges this whole punk began in the mid-70s thing, right? Like, these guys are precursors, and they always have me questioning that number. I mean, what is this album if it's not punk? And I'm pretty sure it existed, in the dark corners of the live scene for a good half decade, or a full decade before punk really gets its flowers. So this was a great find for me. It pushes that time envelope back, and it gives me hope of unearthing even more early punk when new genres come out. Like, those pioneers, they're just in a great place where they can just do crazy things. They're experimenting. They're really just their own makers at that point. The rules haven't set in. Not that punk has many, but there's themes that flow through it and that. And so I'm really excited, when we get a chance to listen to something like this. As you said, the album was recorded live over 2 nights, clocks in at a good 40 minutes, which I think is your sweet spot, give or take. You really get a feeling for the energy of a band like this, when they're live. You'll never quite be able to recreate that in a studio. And to me, this is a good recording. Sometimes you want that gritty, low res distortion kind of feel to it. When you have a band like this, it's kind of like the jazz of punk and metal, right? You can't appreciate it unless it's fully witnessed live. And I guess this is the best approximation that we're going to have of this band. And I think in general, I think it's a great representation. I bring that up because it does a good job of capturing sound and energy. And if you've ever been to a very loud and physical punk metal show, this is going to totally remind you of that. I haven't been to one in a long, long time. I don't think I'm the right age to survive one anymore. So I'm going to need albums like this. Yeah, Starship. I don't know. I couldn't quite get into that big guitar solo breakdown instrument. I think that's the only thing really that you need to be in a live show specifically to really enjoy. The Tragically Hip do like 8 to 10 minute guitar-y kind of riffy solo type things too. I don't really like that on their live covers either. So I think that's the only knock against the live side of this thing, is that they tried to keep that like 8-minute breakdown type of thing in there. And that's just purely my personal bias. Mileage may vary. These lyrics are very, punk. I would almost say very Kiss-esque if I was to kind of rate it, where they get knocked sometimes for the simplicity of their lyrics. We have winners here like, working here before you, mama, soaking wet. You think you're satisfied. You ain't seen nothing yet. I said, wham bam. Thank you, ma'am. I'm a born hellraiser and I don't give a damn. That is Rocket Reducer number 62, which I actually really like, but I also like Kiss too. But they're not winning any Shakespeare awards for their lyrics anytime soon. Borderline, it's a love song. And I think it's love the way that punk intended it to be. It's just a giant wall of sound. I really enjoy trying to wade through it, but sometimes I just let it wash over me too, like just a big giant ASMR kind of experience there. This isn't something you can listen to on headphones. I think you have to have a decent set of speakers. I know we usually say the opposite, that you need a good set of headphones to really experience some of these albums. I think this one is the opposite. I think you need a really good set of speakers with some solid woofers and mid-range in there, and you just got to let this music hit you in the gut a couple times. I think the track I liked the most, and I'll close out with this, was Motor City is Burning. It's a great little bluesy number hidden on this album. It's great. It's perfectly positioned to break the blistering tempo of the album. If I was 5 songs into a live show, this would have been a great time to just sit back, have something a bit slower, be swaying a little bit, and it carries over really nicely into the album too. I think you need that break. As I said, right before this, Borderline was just this massive wall of sound, and having something easily digestible, a little bit formulaic. They're not doing anything too crazy from a blues perspective. I think they're just going to recognize a solid blues progression and enjoy it. Not in a negative way. It's going to be good for them. That's about it. You might get the idea. I enjoyed this album. I did. I really rocked along with it. What about you, Alan?
All right. Thanks, Scott. I have never heard of MC5 before this review. Or if I had, I didn't pay them too much mind. Maybe I heard them in passing. I don't know. But anyway, thanks for picking this, Scott. It's been an interesting month of listening. So from the very first time I played this album through, I'm going to have to admit I wasn't all that impressed. It sounds noisy and chaotic, and as a live recording, I was left thinking this probably would have been much more enjoyable to me if I was actually there watching them play at the Detroit Grand Ballroom back in 1968. And I know it's not just me here. It's a strange choice for a band to come out the gate swinging with a debut album that's a live recording, right? That's just a strange choice. I guess it kind of makes sense, though. I mean, they did have a pretty impressive local following because they were jamming different venues night after night after night. And I guess even the label executives thought that MC5 probably could do with feeding off of a live audience's energy, and they wanted to capture that freneticism and power in the recording. So fair enough. But with live recordings, you also get a lot of imperfections. And maybe that's all part of the punk rock aesthetic. Because as you guys have pointed out, MC5 is considered a proto-punk sort of heavily influential band. Influential anyway to more mainstream or maybe more infamous punk bands that would come. So for that reason, despite my personal feelings on this album, I do have to acknowledge that the band and the album do have some gravity. And though I've never been the biggest fan of punk music, I do like certain aspects of it, right? I think it's cool that punk bands aren't afraid to get political and stand up for what they believe and push against the mainstream narratives of the day. And MC5 did just that with this album, with some of their lyrical content. Throughout repeat listenings to kick out the jams, I kept on wondering what these songs would have sounded like if they had actually recorded in a studio. By the members' own admission, they weren't playing the best that they could when they recorded Kick Out the Jams. Nerves or drugs or whatever the case may be, they just weren't as tight and cohesive a unit as they felt that they could have been or should have been. And I don't know, man, I'm just left thinking maybe the songs would have been more enjoyable to me if they were recorded in a proper studio environment where you've got control over timing and levels and all of that stuff, right? And to be fair, a bit of studio magic can go a long way to making music sound better and feel cohesive, but it can also be overdone. And I will cite a famous example with Nirvana's Nevermind album, which sounds like a far departure from what the band actually sounded like live, to the point where Kurt actually really didn't like Nirvana on Nevermind. He just didn't like the way it sounded. And so that's why when they recorded In Utero, it sounds so much more raw and aggressive, because that's kind of more true to who they were. But then, like, there was still studio magic that made those songs sound better than any of the live versions I've ever heard them do of those same songs. So, I don't know, at least in my opinion. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's some amount of mixing and mastering and capturing audio in a controlled environment that can, kind of keep your raw aggression, but make it sound more palatable. And I think at this point, I'm becoming that meme of an old man shouting at a cloud. I think there are only a couple of Kick Up the Jams tunes that really resonated with me. Scott, like you said, Motor City is Burning. That one's probably the top choice for me, just because of the bluesy, soulful quality. There's just less freneticism. It's a lower BPM. And I just felt like I could actually sit back and enjoy the song for what it was. And the other one that kind of stood out to me was I Want You Right Now, which I think comes right after in the song list. And it's also a bit of a slower, kind of heavier jam with some really good dynamic range and also a lack of freneticism. So I don't know. I think those were really the only two standout tracks for me that I could see myself willingly wanting to listen to again. The rest of the stuff on this album for me just kind of lacked the musicality that I kind of want to hear in my music. Your mileage may vary, as you said. So let's throw it over to Darren and see what he thinks.
Thanks, Alan, and I definitely agree with everything you guys are saying. First of all, Scott Gregg, I actually really like the suggestion. Like, I think this is you have to sit in front of a big stereo and just crank it. MC5 was not meant to be produced in a studio at this time anyway. In later albums they did kind of tighten that up a little bit, and of course they were heavily criticized when this album came out for just sounding awful to the general public and of course the critics, and nobody had really quite heard this amount of noise structured this way, or unstructured maybe is a better word. First of all, it might be important to note that so first of all, the members it started with Wayne Kramer and Michael Davis, who are the guitar players. Both of them now are actually really good guitar players and have played in bands and have played for many cover bands and things like that. And were really good, but they were heavily influenced by jazz. They loved Coltrane and free jazz like Sun Ra and a lot of those influences. So it's funny when you think this is punk, but it really came from a jazz structure where they're like, let's just play all over the place and we'll kind of try and meet up now and then. It was literally one of their ethos was just, hey, you got free reign, try and keep it in. They knew, apparently, there's a great podcast called The Vinyl Guide, and Wayne Kramer did an episode on that. It was really good. Recommended if you, want to learn a bit more. And he talks about this album and MC5 in general. But he was just saying that, yeah, he's like, we were pretty good guitarists, but, the rhythm section at the time, and the other members, are Rob Tyner, on lead vocals, and then, Fred Sonic Smith, way to go, Sonic Collective, and, Dennis Thompson, were the remaining members. He kind of felt that maybe they weren't quite as good as musicians as they were, but they kind of liked how it all went together, and they kind of didn't give a shit. They were really trying to push the envelope into something new and loud and aggressive. And they were known for their live shows. Apparently they would play for anybody, anytime, anywhere. They played just thousands of shows in the Detroit area in the, early mid 60s up until really this time when they finally kind of got a break. There was, Danny Fields was the gentleman's name. He worked for Elektra Records, and he was kind of, I believe he was black, and kind of would go and find these alternative acts and was kind of low man on the totem pole, Elektra. So they give him these little assignments. Okay, we've heard about, these Detroit bands. Go check them out. And he just loved MC5. and even at the time said to them, okay, we like you. We're going to sign you. This is written for this album. Do you know anybody else like this? Cause I like this sound. And they're like, well, there's this band that kind of hangs out and opens for us sometime. And, you may or may not have heard of them now, but it was Iggy Pop and the Stooges. So here they were opening for the MC5 at that time. And this Danny Fields is like, okay. And he went and saw them and loved the Stooges as well. So Elektra offered, the MC5 a $15,000 upfront, contract, to sign their signing bonus. And, the Stooges got $5,000 only, $5,000 because they were this B band, not that. So interesting that they both basically were signed at the same time, at that. And yeah, and I mean, they agreed to do it live. And it's funny with the sound, Wayne Kramer admits, he says, like Scott mentioned to it, that it was over 2 nights. He said, but really they actually just chose a night because they kept it in order. And you think about how archaic this sounds now, but they literally recorded it off the board in this Detroit ballroom. And he said they just decided to keep the second night. He's just like, literally when they first come into Ramblin' Rose, the first song, he hit his guitar too hard and I can't remember, but one of his strings went out of tune. Now, I don't have that kind of ear to hear it, and it is kind of a noisy album as it is, but apparently he has a string out of tune the entire album. So not only was it one song, and you'd think, oh, they'll just stop and then they'll do the next one. He's like, no, they actually played that show like that fast, back to back to back. They never stopped. They did that album just in basically that one take. And he's guitar, so he never had time. He didn't even stop and or have 2 guitars. This is how broke they were and things like that. They just had a guitar. So if you're a guitarist and can pick out that, apparently you will. So really interesting. And so he apparently hated it, not only because of that, but they thought that, and you mentioned it, Alan, that they didn't actually perform that well that night. They said, no, that wasn't really good. But of course the label's like, oh, we're only paying for 2 nights, and they rushed it out. And hey, it did garner great success, and it obviously became the album it is today. It has been consistently on the Rolling Stones top 500 albums. There've been 3 iterations of that list. They're on it every time. So very influential for that basis of really starting this kind of alt punk, alt rock movement that nobody else was really doing at that time. Yeah, one funny thing on Kick Out the Jams too, that song starts with him saying, "Kick out the jam, motherfuckers." And, of course, that was the first single, but they released it to radio. They did take that out, which the MC5 didn't like, but they agreed to do it for the radio. And then the album wasn't out yet. And MC5 said, okay, it was a hit. So it was starting to get a lot of airplay. And the Elektra said, well, let us get the album out right away. We want sales. And they're like, no. Let it build, and then get it out. And then, people will, cause they knew this album was going to come off really strange to a lot of people. And they thought if they let it build, and then also they'd have the curse word on the album version, the motherfuckers, and which was really known at that time, one of the first times anybody had cursed on an album of a major label anyway, that was released. It was one of the first times. So of course, MC5 apparently had that voting right and said, no, you can't do it. They're like, okay, well, you have the right. We won't do it. They did it anyway. Right away, it got flack, and it got a ton of flack. Radio stations started to pull it. And then all of a sudden the single that was taking off started to decline due to this just blowback from saying motherfuckers, which is crazy. So apparently there was a local chain there, a big department store called Hudson's, that banned it. And they actually took out like a full page ad in a magazine. And it said something like, had a big Elektra logo and their album, and it said, "Stick alive with MC5 and fuck Hudson's." Like right in this newspaper it was a minor newspaper. It wasn't a big one. Instantly dropped by their label after that. So that was why they didn't really last too long on Elektra and ended up switching labels. But crazy story, right? And they never got. Apparently they did a lot of drugs. They were pretty unruly. Didn't really get along with a lot of people and were hard to manage. But just had so many influences out there. Even the album cover, they were shown a version where if you go and look it up, you'll see it's kind of like, now you'd be like, oh, it's a really crude Photoshop. But really back then it was cutting technology where they were playing with the films and overlaying photos on top of each other to create one, kind of composite photo. And what they were shown and what was released was totally different. And apparently in the top, I think it's the top right corner, I should open it in front of me, there's like the art director put himself in it. So there's just some white dude in a suit, and they're like, who the fuck is this guy? And they're like, oh, that's art director Bob. And they're like, what the fuck's he doing on our label cover? Like,
I see it. That's funny. I didn't notice that before.
Yeah. And apparently, so they did not have a good relationship with the label because of all that. And, just shenanigans, right? But for me to get into the album itself, as much I love punk music, I love exploring this kind of thing. I bought like a best of MC5 maybe like 10 years ago. And there's some songs on it I like, but I gotta admit, I struggled. Like Ramblin' Rose I kind of like, and it goes into Kick Out the Jams, which are pretty good. But then it's kind of all over the place, kind of noisy, kind of unstructured. It's like, you're not dancing to this. It was meant to be in a giant ballroom. And apparently they would say when they were live, like they use the word delirious, that when the show ended, there'd just be like, bodies and sweat and craziness everywhere, and people were just delirious with this hype because this band was just like that intense live, and that was their thing. But I think that's hard to translate when you're just listening to it, like as Scott said, on headphones or anything like that. And I agree, and I just struggled with the musicality of it all. And I think you alluded to that a bit too, Alan. It was just kind of a bit all over the place for me. I respect what they did and how it started punk and this alternative scene. But, I kind of struggled. Like, honestly, besides those first two opening songs, I was like, I get it, but it was just tough to listen to. Anyway, I've shared some facts and gone on this. Let's go back to Scott Coates, who picked this, and see kind of how he rediscovered or discovered for the first time about this.
Thanks, Darren. I love how you always share more than anybody who even picks the albums and knows about it. That's great. I thought I was going to love this album just because of all the artists I'd heard reference it. And Kick Out the Jams has to be one of the most sampled punk albums too. Like the number of songs that have used that. I remember, I think first time hearing it in the KLF, Last Train to Trans Central. At the beginning of that song, it's in there, but it's really sampled a lot. One thing I will give huge kudos to this album is, god damn, does it sound good for a live recorded album, particularly on a budget. Like, I've heard big bands live albums that don't sound as good as this, and every time I listened to it, particularly the first few tracks, I was like, this thing sounds really good for something that was recorded again in 1969 by some band with no money. So kudos there. Another kind of kudos is reminding myself that this was the first time anyone had ever heard this sound. And it took me back to two albums we've had on this kind of collective here. Was Eruption by Van Halen on Van Halen 1, which I think Scott G picked. Like, to hear Eruption and a guitar do that for the first time must have blown people's minds. Same with Black Sabbath on Black Sabbath, like the first time metal was heard. And I think the sounds coming out of people's speakers when they heard this kind of really must have, frightened mothers and church groups and really, freak people out to a certain degree. So that's kind of cool. Kick Out the Jams is super fun. Rocket Reducer number 62, I thought, wow, does that ever sound like Kick Out the Jams? As I heard it the first time, I thought it was another version of Kick Out the Jams. And then I looked, I'm like, oh no, it isn't. Motor City is Burning, like you guys. I thought that one was okay. Then I kind of got to Borderline and I just thought, wow, this is noise. Like it began to really irritate me. And I also a random one, the guy that says it's time to kick out the jams, his voice really reminds me of the guy in Forrest Gump at the protest in front of Washington Monument, where he's like, Forrest Gump, everyone. I just thought, like, this is the same guy. It seems like the same guy the way he looked too. I wonder if it was a take on him. So, well, I appreciate what they did and that they really ushered in punk, right? Something we now know so well, punk. This thing gave me a headache and irritated the shit out of me. And in fact, I gave it one last dance on Sunday morning and I was a little hungover and I honestly felt a little nauseous and I had to pause it twice and then come back to it. I don't like it. And Starship is just like a turd burger at the very end. Just so much noise and stuff. So high degree of respect for being the first. The sound quality is awesome. I like Kick Out the Jams itself. But yeah, I just found this thing grated on me and was really irritating, which was a disappointment because I thought I was going to love it. So how about we get into scores and we'll go back to Scott G.
Yeah, thanks. I was just quickly looking at who sampled it because I hadn't even thought of that, right? And there's a bunch of people that did it, including the presidents of the United States off of like I think it was their first album. It's the one with Bo Weevil and Peaches. Yeah. I listened to the shit out of that album and I didn't even think about it, right? So I'm going to have to go back and re-listen and see what their version of it, because they play with like a couple bass guitar strings on their guitars, right? So now, second we're done this, I'm going to go check that out. Yeah. Scores wise, I mean, I was still very enthusiastic. This is an imperfect diamond. You know, it's got some jagged edges to it. I agree with everything that everyone had said on that front. There's challenges, transitioning this from the ballroom to, the bedroom or wherever you're listening to it. And, I mean, it could be good for that. I don't know, but yeah, I still think it's a great album. So on a recommend level, I'm going to give it a 4. I think it's, again, proto-punk. It's one of the earliest ones that I've ever heard of. It's influenced a lot of people. Didn't influence me a huge amount though, so I'll put that at a 3. It is going to send me down a road of trying to look a little bit earlier than I had been before for punk. Cause now I'm like, well, wait a minute. There's people in the 60s that are doing this now. So I'm going to be checking out the back half of the 60s for more like that. Overall, I'm going to generously round that out to a 4. Just with the understanding that, again, this is a bit of a rough, unpolished diamond. Don't expect technical perfection from it, but enjoy it as a snapshot of what you might have seen in a ballroom from a really early, really raw, really don't give a fuck kind of punk band. What about you, Alan?
Yeah, thanks. Scott Coates, you mentioned off the top that a professional music reviewer or critic or whatever called this album ridiculous, overbearing, and pretentious. I just kind of thought it was kitschy or maybe a little bit shitty. Groundbreaking? Perhaps. Yep. Important? Sure. But it's just not for me, and I am so happy to kick these jams out to the curb this month, the end of this month. I mean, given all the great music that was around during the same era, I would absolutely be lying to you if I said I wouldn't rather be listening to the Beatles or Jimi Hendrix, but that's just my personal take. And again, my feelings might have been different if Kick Out the Jams was a proper studio recording. You know, it was just too raw for me to really enjoy. And I mean, I guess if nothing else, this month I've just learned something new about myself and my own musical tastes, or at least now I'm more consciously aware of that I guess there are certain attributes I value in the music that I listen to. So overall, I'm going to give this a 1.5 out of 5. For recommendation, I'm going to give it a 1.5 out of 5 if you really hate your ears. And influence, I'm going to give it a 2.5 only because it influenced other bands that I don't like. And of course, I am being a bit unfair. I do want to actually go and explore some of their music that was recorded in a studio setting. Who knows? I might actually find out I really like it. But this album just ain't it for me, fam. Over to you, Darren.
Yeah, I hear you. A couple things I always like to finish with a few little tidbits. And another influence for them was James Brown, too. They actually thought they were trying to duplicate James Brown at the Apollo, is what they were like, wow, if we could reach that level of live performance and getting the crowd into it was a big thing for them. And you know, I agree the music is tough for me. And you mentioned about the peers and what was going on at the time. But in a way, I mean, if you think like Joni Mitchell or Dylan or Neil Young and these big acts, but they were all approaching it from a very like folky, like lovey 60s point. And these guys came in and they were pure anti-establishment, like, fuck you, motherfuckers. Like, so I think that part you got to give them a lot of credit for, and they really just like kicked down that door. They kicked the jam out of that shit. So I really appreciate that. One thing to mention too is Wayne Kramer actually does a good charity now. He spent a lot of them went to jail, but he went to jail and came out and then started this charity that actually brings guitars and music lessons and things into prisoners to kind of give back because he had spent a lot of time there. A lot of big support, and Rage Against the Machine covered this as well, and he is very close with Tom Morello, and Morello is a big advocate for that charity as well, and has helped him out and has played with him before. Obviously, Rage, love them. I think a lot of listeners will probably get to who they are through like, oh, Rage Against the Machine. I just thought that was their song, Kick Out the Jams, like when they did that. So on that, I mean, I highly recommend listening to this with cannabis. It will help. It would definitely help. Castle Rock Pick Me Up. I forgot the producer last time, but Castle Rock is a local producer in Canada. And Pick Me Up is the name of the strain. It's a really good one. High THC, but actually it hits really nice. It will help with this album. But coming back to my scores, I'm really with all of you so far. I'll start at recommend. I'm going to give it a 3.5 just because, and I'm recommending to the music fan out there, I think you have to go back and listen to it just for this space and time of what was happening. I agree, not so much that it's the best album that really stands the test of time, because I don't think it does that well. Influence, I'm going to be very generous and approach this from I get how influential and what they did. So I'm actually giving that a 4, but it didn't actually really influence me. If I was doing it on a very personal level, I would say like a 2, something like that. And overall, I appreciate what it was, but I'm coming in at a 2.5 overall for this album for me. So, but I love the pick, Scott. So what were your scores? What did you come up with?
Yeah, I think we're all very similar. And Alan kind of rated the lowest, and where my heart kind of maybe is, I didn't like it, but I'll give it a 4 for recommend, just because, again, the first punk album. Like, if someone's really trying to understand music, and, I forgot that Rage Against the Machine did kick out the jams, but remember it clearly now. So I'll recommend it at a 4, just because if you want to understand the history of music, I think it's important. Influence, I'm going to give it a 2. It was 1.5, but I'll give it a 2 because this has gotten me thinking that I've never listened to a Germs album nor a full Black Flag album. And I keep hearing those two bands mentioned lately again. So I'm going to go listen to a Germs album with Pat Smear, who was in the Germs. And I'm going to listen to Black Flag, which of course Henry Rollins was in. So I'll give it a 2. Overall, though, I'm at a 1.5. This thing literally made me feel sick on Sunday morning, right? And it just grated on me and irritated me. And I'm heartbroken because I just thought I was going to love it, right? But I didn't. And, but hey, we are diving deeper into the history of music and the history of rock. And I think we've gone down an interesting road on this one. Thanks for not being pissed, gentlemen. I kind of wondered, I'm like, ooh, everyone's going to be kind of choked with this one. Because again, Sunday morning in particular, I think it was my 4th listen. And yeah, I almost threw up, and I was thinking these guys are not going to be happy. So thank you everyone for listening. We hope you at least enjoyed the exploration and journey of MC5's Kick Out the Jams. I believe Alan is picking his pick for November. So check out the website. You'll see what's up there very soon.
Hey, thanks for joining us on the Sonic Collective, where we've explored the music, the history, and the impact of some of the greatest albums of all time. We hope you've enjoyed our discussions and gained new insights and appreciation for the music you and we love. Join us next month for another exciting album, and until then, keep listening to great music.